As I'm getting my bikes ready for the season, I'm going to start by focusing on the drivetrain, getting the drivetrain cleaned, getting the drivetrain lubed, and all set to go. So what's a drivetrain? It's basically the parts that make the bike go, other than your legs. So I've got a road bike here on top, mountain bike on the bottom, and we're going to see both bikes have very similar components. So the drivetrain starts with the crank. As you pedal, it turns the crank. You can see the crank is turning the chain, and the chain is turning the rear cassette. Most of our bikes are going to have some form of gear changing, so that's done with a rear derailleur, which is spring loaded here. It allows the chain to move from one piece of the cassette to another, and the front derailleur allows the chain to slide from one chainring to the other, adjusting your gears. And we come back down here to the mountain bike, I see the same thing. I've got a crank, I've got the chain, turn the crank, the chain moves, the chain in turn turns to the rear cassette, and I have a rear derailleur here as well. Only difference is this particular mountain bike does not have a front derailleur. Some bikes will have 1, 2, or 3 chainrings in the front, and in the back you'll have somewhere either between 3 or we're up to 11 and 12 now. So what I want to do first, I'm going to start cleaning the drivetrain, and then we'll lube up all the drivetrain points. So my first step in cleaning the drivetrain is degreasing. I'm going to use my degreaser and my rag. In this case, I've got a biodegradable degreaser. You could also use alcohol. If you really had to, maybe some carbon choke cleaner. I would avoid that. It's probably a little bit too harsh for the chain and the paint. But just a little bit of degreaser here, put on your rag. And the reason we want to do this is two things. We're getting the old grease off the chain, and stuck in that grease is any road grit, sand, just dust. All that stuff is going to just wear away at your drivetrain components. And once that happens, it's time to start replacing. So if we can keep them clean, keep them lubed, we won't have to replace. So I've got some degrease on my rag. I'm going to put it on the chain, just hold it in place, and pedal backwards for a while. So with the freewheel or the free hub body, I can just pedal away, maybe rub it around a little bit, get that chain nice and clean. Same thing I would do up on the mountain bike above, sorry, the road bike above. Just pedal backwards, maybe add a little bit more degreaser, do it again, find a different spot in the rag. My rag's getting kind of gross right now, so I'm going to try and find a clean spot. A little bit more degreaser, and just keep doing this till the rag comes up somewhat not gross. I always put it on the bottom piece of chain and pedal backwards. If I were to pedal forward, that's going to get sucked into the derailleurs, and that's going to be painful. So just pedal backwards, work the chain a couple times, and you're good from that. When we start looking at the rear cassette, sometimes that gets really gunked up. Just use this brush here, same thing. Now I'm going to pedal forward with a brush in place, different spots of the cassette. At the same time I'm cleaning off the chain, I'm going to get in here, brush off my guide wheels, brush out anything that's stuck here in the rear derailleur. If I had a front derailleur, I'd get in there too. And just get any dirt, any gross gunk or anything, old grease, get that off of there so that we're ready to lube it up nicely. I'm ready to start lubing my chain. The next step is to pick a lube. Lubes come in basically 2 styles, dry and wet. For my road bikes, I typically use dry. For my mountain bikes, I use dry or wet depending on where I'm going. The difference is dry is for like dry conditions. It's a very thin, lightweight lube. It really makes things move well. And wet lube is a little bit heavier, a little bit tackier. It's designed to stick on the parts a little bit heavier, a little better during muddy, wet riding. So today we're going to use kind of an in-between, the Pro X Lite. You can go anywhere from $5 a bottle to the really expensive Hydrodynamics, which is why I only have a sample of it. If you don't have that, simple all-purpose lube with Teflon would be great. Don't use WD-40. Avoid motor oil. They operate different temperatures. As you go to lube the bike, the only parts I'm really going to focus on are the chain and the derailleur. I'm not going to put any lube on the cassette. It's going to get that all by itself. If I had a front derailleur, I'd put it on that. Definitely nothing on the brakes. Lubing a brake defeats the point of the brake. And the rest of the parts are pretty much sealed and don't need any work. Just a side note, if you're washing your bike, don't spray under high pressure because you don't want to get these sealed bearings dirty or wet. So I'm going to use my light lube, and my goal is just to lube the entire chain. As I lube, I want to look at the chain and see what it's made of. So that each chain has a couple parts. It's got these inner rollers and the outer plates. I want to make sure there's lube where these rollers move around the outer plates. So I'm going to hit every link with my lube. And you can either just go 1, 2, 3, keep going all the way down, or let me show you an easier way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to, again, pedal backwards on the crank and hold the lube bottle so that every piece of chain, every link gets a touch of lube on it. Don't need to go real heavy. This particular lube is a little bit light and runny, so I'm just going to do this. Usually I find it easier to work back here at the cassette. And just one full time around the chain, that's all you need. Now it just needs a little bit of time to set, let it work its way in between those guide plates and rollers. The next step, probably the most important, is we're going to get the extra lube off. If we leave all this extra lube on there, it's going to collect a lot more dirt and grit, and that's something we don't want. The lube is sat on there for a moment or two. Let's get it off. I'll take my new rag, dry, clean rag, or close to clean, and just like before, pedal backwards, rag against the chain. We're just getting all that extra grease off there, extra lube, so that it's ready to go. All the lube at this point should be in the rollers between the guide plates, so we're just getting the surface off. So some other parts we're going to start lubing. Let's look at the derailleur. So in the derailleur, I'm going to put a touch of lube right here on the guide pulleys, both guide pulleys, and then inside the derailleur, I'm going to hit that spring there too. A little bit easier to see on the road bike, so you can see we're going to come in here, just get a little bit of lube on that spring, get a little lube on each guide pulley, and then really got to work that derailleur, flex a little bit, push on it, work that spring, maybe run it through some cycles shifting, get that lube spread in. The parts we didn't lube, this rear cassette, it's going to get enough just from the chain. On the mountain bike I didn't have a front derailleur, so we're going to look at that on the road bike. Front derailleur, very similar. I'm going to take my lube, and I want to focus everywhere metal moves against metal. So every pivot is going to get some lube. That spring in the middle is going to get some lube. Basically, anytime there's metal moving on metal, lube it up. While we're here lubing, there's a couple other things we can hit real quick, and that is the cables and the housing. And for this, I'm going to switch to the needle luber. A little bit smaller opening, a little bit more precise. It's going to allow me to get just a touch of lube right here on the cable where it exits the housing. So a touch of lube there. Everywhere the cable meets the housing, go just put a little drop of lube on that cable. We can do that for inside the derailleurs also. All right, do that up here. The cable comes out of the housing. And this can help keep dirt and grit from going inside the cable housing, which will make us have to replace